Hello, I'm going to tell you the story of the legend of mile marker 1225. Adam and Eva Adams decided to take the Blue Ridge Parkway from their home in Virginia to Adam's parents' house in North Carolina, where they were planning to arrive before Christmas Eve. And since they were both busy lawyers who needed some R&R, they wanted to avoid the interstate. And so they thought this would be a good way to get above it all and to have a relaxed drive along the parkway with their two children and Adam's Aunt Sarah, his mother's sister. Plus, Aunt Sarah had told them that this legend of mile marker 1225, which actually doesn't exist according to the National Park Service, because there are only 496 miles of the parkway. But there had been plenty of reports of tourists encountering this supposedly non-existent picnic area during the Christmas season. And they said they'd pull into the parking lot and miraculously their empty gift bags would be filled with presents. Well, Adam and Eva's children, 9-year-old Paula and 7-year-old Peter, were fascinated by this prospect. So over a river and through the woods, the 5 of them headed south to grandmother's house. And you see, everyone knew that it was Adam's mother's house, since Adam's father spent all his time in his man cave in the old barn. So Adam and Eva sat up front, and Peter and Paula sat in the back with Great Auntie Sarah in between them to break up fights by telling stories and playing games with them. And in the back of the SUV was their luggage and a sack of Granny Smith apples, because Eva insisted they bring some to her mother-in-law for a pie, even though Adam said that his father liked pecan pie. Eva said everyone else liked apple pie and his father would get over it. And there were lots of presents in the back, as well as the empty gift bags for the miraculous experience that they all hoped for. So it was December 23rd, and they expected it would be only a few hours' drive, especially since there was a good weather report. But they had only been on the road for a couple of hours when it started to snow. And Adam said, "This can't amount to anything," because the forecast was for clear skies. But nevertheless, it continued to flurry and accumulate on the road. And after a while, they decided they'd need to get off the parkway and spend the night in the little town of Rudolph, Virginia. Well, Rudolph, Virginia was a tourist attraction associated with the mile marker 1225 legend. And it had lots of businesses associated with Christmas, and the town center included a large lodge with Christmas-themed rooms. So Adam and Eva and Peter stayed in the Santa's workshop room, mainly because Peter liked to build things, and there was a huge Lego set in that room. And Paula and Great Auntie Sarah stayed in the Rudolph room, and Paula was fascinated by this coat rack that had large antlers for coats and a big red nightlight for a nose. And by the time they got settled in, It was almost dark, so they had supper in the lodge cafe and went to bed early in the hope that the snow would subside overnight and they could get back on the parkway the next day, which was Christmas Eve. Well, the next morning they saw that the ground and the roads were covered with a couple inches of snow, and it was flurrying off and on. So they put on boots and walked into town, and the shops were open for the morning at least. So Adam and Eva went shopping, but Peter, Paula, and Auntie Sarah stayed outside, mainly because they were out of money. But there was a group doing yoga, including this move called Salutation to the Snow. And there were children making snow angels. And Paula made a few friends and invited them and their dogs to sing carols with her and Peter and great Auntie Sarah. And then by the time that Adam and Eva returned, the sun had come out, and while they were having lunch, the weather became unseasonably warm, and all the snow on the road melted. So they packed up and got back on the parkway. And after driving several miles, Peter triumphantly revealed that he had Rudolph's nose and he was going to build a coat rack at home. And Eva said, "No, Peter, you weren't supposed to take that." And she was driving, and so Adam called the lodge and explained what happened and apologized and said, Can we mail you the nose? And he said they just laughed it off. They said, "This happens all the time, and we have plenty of noses. Don't worry about it." So then Peter and Paula got into an argument about who the nose belonged to. And Paula said that after all, it was in her room. And Adam said, "Peter, give Paula the nose. You stole it. You don't deserve it." So Peter handed Paula the nose. But then he had the biggest tantrum ever. And he sobbed and gasped until Great Auntie Sarah told a scary story about an exorcism, and he started to calm down a little bit. Well, by this time, they were getting pretty close to the North Carolina state line. And Adam said, "So much for the legend of mile marker 1225. And Eva said, "Don't speak too soon, Adam." And just around the next bend, there was a picnic area, but there was no sign for mile marker 1225. However, there was a herd of deer near the woods, and so Adam slowly pulled over, and he told everyone to be quiet as they got out of the car, and they walked down a path to one of the most beautiful scenes that they had ever witnessed together. There was a group of deer that were looking at them like, "Are you friends or foes?" They seemed to be curious, and one of the deer was wagging its tail like a dog, and the snow around them was sparkling in the sunshine. And it was pristine, except for a few tracks of birds and beasts, which kind they didn't know. And there was the scent of Fraser fir and Scotch pine. And there was a hush. And they all looked at one another with a kind of recognition that they had experienced something very special together. And it seemed like that moment was an eternity, until a snow-covered branch snapped and fell to the ground, and the deer ran off into the woods. Well, it was at that moment that Paula reached into her pocket and pulled out Rudolph's nose and handed it to Peter. She said, "Here, Peter, I want you to have this." And he smiled so big and hugged her and said, "Thanks, sis." So they headed back to the car and noticed right away that their previously empty gift bags were full of presents. And Adam shook his head and said, "How can this be? And we didn't even see mile marker 1225. And Eva said, "You know, Adam, not everything has a rational explanation." And so they all got back into the car and headed down the parkway through the woods to grandmother's house.